experience with fear is much the same as anybody else's. It's just that I've done it a lot more and dealt with it more. It's like I'm doing it a long time. I've been scared a lot. And Antarctica is a perfect example of a trip that was very scary. And, I had to manage fear basically every climbing day. And towards the end of the trip, we got into a pretty good routine of doing a big day out and then a rest day. Because basically each of the things that we climbed would be these like all-day affairs that were harrowing. I mean, as you said, they were quite scary. And so then you spend the next day recovering both physically and mentally. And then you'd be like, oh, geez, now we have to go do it again. And then, so like every other day we were having these sort of traumatic experiences that are quite scary. But at the same time, you're in this incredible place with this once in a lifetime opportunity to climb new routes on new walls in this beautiful, beautiful landscape. You're kind of like, you have to take advantage of it. But you're just like, oh, but it's so scary. On my rest days, I ate like an entire family-sized tub of Nutella, just like spooning Nutella, just all shell-shocked, sitting in the cook tent, being like, anything to make me feel happiness, because I was like so gripped. But
Conrad Anker just spooning you in the tent, making you feel safe.
No, the last week or so of that trip, Conrad and Jimmy were up on the wall, like camping on the mountain, trying to finish their first ascent of the largest peak in the range. And so it meant that basically, the kids were left alone at home. And so that's when I really went hard on the Nutella, because I was like, oh, the adults are gone. It's time to just like spoon Nutella and go do first ascents.
That's great. So mentally, do you have, aside from just stress eating Nutella, what other ways do you try to process fears, whether they be rational or irrational, so that you can get out there and perform?
Basically, everybody manages fear the same way. Like if you get afraid, like once you start to experience the physiological sensation of fear, like your pulse is elevated, your vision narrows, like your hands are sweating, like all those things. Like once you're afraid, I think everybody manages that roughly the same way, which is taking some deep breaths, composing themselves, somehow pulling it together. And that's always hard. I mean, that's hard for everybody. Basically, once you're scared, it's always difficult. I think that where you have a lot more control and what is the better strategy overall is to prepare for that fear ahead of time so that you don't reach that state of being very afraid. It's like, and that's where the gradual expansion of your comfort zone, the sort of steady desensitization, like exposing yourself to the things that are slightly scary but not too scary. Like basically there's a ton of things that you can do to prepare ahead of time so that you never actually experience that deep fear.
Is visualizing what could go wrong, everything that could go wrong, part of that? I've heard you talk in the past about like when you're working on the free rider, in a lot of detail, thinking about if my shoe rips, if a bird flies in my face, what would my body do as it tumbles down the wall, that kind of thing. Like at first, that may elicit a stronger kind of fear response, I think, in a lot of people. But is it that exposure therapy? Like, are you doing that so much that then you become desensitized to it?
No, actually, for me, that kind of visualization has more to do with making sure that I'm never surprised by anything, because I feel like an easy way to get really scared is for something unexpected to occur or something that you hadn't prepared for, something that you didn't foresee. And like basically anytime there's uncertainty, it's like it opens the door, doubts start to creep in. It's like, if you're not really sure, like, is this what I was expecting? Like this isn't what I've experienced before, then all the doubts start to tumble in, and that's when you really experience fear. And so for me, the visualizations, like the broad visualizations of any potential thing that could happen, has more to do with managing uncertainty like that, just making sure that nothing catches you by surprise.
Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching these videos. Quick 30 seconds to tell you about the Patreon that I've started to help fund this massive operation running out of my podcast/YouTube/utility closet, which I'm coming to you from right here. Check out the Patreon down below. I've got pro clinics with some of the biggest names in the sport, exclusive for patrons, helping you learn how to level up in your training and your performance, all sorts of other bonus content. Appreciate your support. Check it out.
I mean, that's such a big part of managing fear, is differentiating between the rational fears and the irrational fears, because there are a lot of things in climbing that you should be afraid of, because you can die while climbing, and it's totally healthy and appropriate to be afraid of that. But then there are also tons of irrational fears, like when you're on some overhanging sport route and you're on a brand new rope and everything about the whole system is safe and perfect and wonderful, and yet you still are afraid to take a fall, like that's totally irrational. And those are the types of fears that you need to learn how to just put aside and just force past them. But there are a lot of fears in climbing that you shouldn't set aside. You should be like, you should reevaluate all your decisions, Like I've had plenty of times in climbing when you're something like, oh, I'm very afraid and I should be afraid because if I fall, I'm going to die. And then you're left there wondering, like, what did I do to get me to this place? Like, should I be reconsidering my life choices? Like, what am I doing?
Right. And is this the time to be having that conversation with myself as I'm on the side of the fifth traverse?
Yeah, well, that's the point of visualization and things ahead of time. So you can have those conversations with yourself beforehand so that when you get yourself into scary situations, at least you've dealt with it before. Like, you know what the deal is.
But I want to talk about angst climbing. And you wrote a pretty harrowing chapter in Alone on the Wall about doing the rainbow wall. I think it was after a breakup or something like that. You brought a ton of emotion into it. It was what I feared might be a breakup, but we didn't wind up breaking up at the time. Oh, so perhaps even less pointless, but even more angsty for that matter. How much does emotion come into play when you climb? Is that something that, as you've gotten more mature and more experienced, that you've been able to eliminate more from your climbing, or is there a certain amount of that kind of angst or emotion that you bring into a climb that's helpful or beneficial in your climbs?
Well, so that type of angst soloing, I mean, there's a whole catalog of climbs like that have occurred in climbing literature. It's not just like that's not a personal thing. It's like there's a whole history of like angst soloing and exciting, I don't know, experiences in the mountains, like due to breakups and whatever. So the thing is, I don't think that that's ever been an important part of my climbing. I think that I occasionally harness that as part of my motivation to go climbing. But it's not like I've ever gone and soloed something because I'm feeling super angstful. It's more that because I'm feeling angstful, like I have a hunger to prove myself in some way or another, I occasionally harness that to do something that I want to do anyway. It's like all the things that I free soloed have all been routes that I want to do at some point in my life. It's just that sometimes it helps to have a little extra push. It's like, and, at the other end of the spectrum, I have something like free soloing El Cap, which is something I wanted to do forever. But then it helped me to have the film crew along and to have, not so much like on the wall, but it helped for the process, to have friends around that you could talk to about it and work on it with. It's like basically harnessing external motivation is a useful way to achieve your own goals. And if that means using angst to your benefit, it's like, sweet. I think that there's another line though, where you're actually, and there is a bit of a history. I mean, there's some essays written from climbers who are actually experiencing suicidal thoughts and things and then go soloing because they legitimately don't care if they live or die. And I've never been even remotely close to that level of psychological turmoil. Like for me, it's just a matter of like using personal drama to fuel achievements, basically. But there are times where you just don't. You're willing to push a little closer to the edge. You're like, you know what, today's the day. I mean, but it's the same. Like many humans exhibit risk taking in different ways. Some people like go to the club and get drunk and drive home and don't care. And like, I mean, they're people roll the dice in their life all the time, or like have unprotected sex, things like that. It's like, there are plenty of ways that people roll dice that are less controlled and I think maybe less intentional than some of the climbs that I've done. And so, I don't know, judge how you will, but it's like everybody's making choices in their life, like how to lead the best life they can.